Junaid was from
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته إخوان وأخوات حضرات المشايخ. We're going to be starting in 90 seconds, inshallah, approximately 90 seconds. So I would humbly request everyone to take their seats, be focused, purify the intention, and we'll get ready to intellectually rumble, inshallah. See you in 90 seconds. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
What happened? Really? It's like my soul.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. It's a cold Sunday. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Beautiful, beautiful. So in this session, my dear brothers and sisters and mashayikh, we're going to be going through the LGBTQ plus ideology. And in this first session, what we're going to do is we're going to unpack 5 key assumptions of the LGBTQ plus ideology. And as you learned from Ustad Muhammad Hijab yesterday, that every idea, every postulation, every truth claim has assumptions. Okay, good. So we're going to be unpacking those assumptions. And we're going to also show what the Islamic view is on those assumptions. What does Tawheed say about this matter? When we refer to the unicity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, What does it say about some of these assumptions? What does the Sharia say? What does the Quran and the Sunnah say concerning these assumptions? And then we're going to use this method to bring people back to Allah, because sometimes when we talk about ideologies, when we talk about LGBTQ plus narrative, nihilism, humanism, liberalism, secularism, all of Shiism, all of these isms, schisms, when we talk about them, sometimes we're doing it in a kind of attack mode, which is perfectly fine, or we're doing it in a defense mode, which is also fine. But I think one of the probably better positions to take is to be able to unpack the assumptions, attack the assumptions, and at the same time, bring them back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There must always be a dawah element, because I believe this is one of the constant sunnahs of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is to call people to Allah. Even the ideologues, even those who adopt these isms, as Ustad Hijab mentioned, that these things are not even the ideologies, like religion, we should consider them as modern day religions. And just like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would give dawah to the Christians, the people of Najran, we will give dawah to the Jews, and so on and so forth, we also should give dawah to the liberals, the ideologues, the queer theorists, right? The LGBTQ plus ideologues, we need to give them dawah. Is this clear? Good. Alhamdulillah. So, the first thing to know, my dear brothers and sisters in Mashayikh, is to understand that there's a war on humanity. You have to accept this. You have to understand this. There is a war on what it means to be human. There is a war on the family. There is a war on the necessary social hierarchies that are required for human flourishing. There is a war on what it means to be a man, masculinity, and what it means to be a woman, femininity. And this war is being fought by the LGBTQ plus ideologues. And this ideology has money, has political support, has support all the way from the top with regards to politicians, the UN, the educational wing of the UN, to the degree that it has become international law to teach these things at schools. And in the UK, for instance, there are many head teachers who are adopting this, and they have become not teachers, but they have become propagandists. They have become ideologues. They have become weapons and foot soldiers of this, I would say, evil ideology. And it's coming to South Africa. Already you're seeing the signs. You're seeing the small steps, the encroachment. They're taking a few inches forward. And you need to learn the lessons of Europe. You need to learn the lessons of the UK. Because it's the same pattern. Yes, there may be some social cultural differences, but it's the same pattern. And it's always better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. And many of you are leaders in your own right. You are mashayikh, your imams, your teachers, your parents. In actual fact, every Muslim is a leader. By virtue of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that every Muslim is a shepherd. Everyone has their own flock to a certain degree. And good leaders, they don't think about the present. What they're doing now is what they thought about 5 years ago. So if I'm a good leader, what we're doing now is what we thought about hopefully 3 years ago, when we first started as sapiens. And my thinking now, our thinking now, should be thinking about what we're doing in the next 3 to 5 years. Because leaders are not reactionary. So we have a duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a duty to the Ummah, a duty to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in order for us to be preparing and dealing with these issues right now. Is this clear? Okay, good. So let's start off with a key principle. And we're going to get some interaction at the end of this presentation. We're going to have scenarios and you're going to spend around 5 minutes to 10 minutes with pairs or in a small group to actually try and apply what we learned today to these scenarios. But let's make it interactive. So the first thing I want to say, my dear beloved brothers, sisters, and mashayikh, is every worldview, every truth claim, every postulation has its own assumptions. Okay? So I want to give you a claim and I want you to figure out the assumption. Are you ready? Oh, by the way, before I do that, I just want to make a quick note, especially for the secret services in the room. Secret services from the UK as well, the MI6. Assalamu alaikum, MI6. I'm saying salam because usually they need a Muslim to do this as well. So, I want to refer to Surah Mumtahana recipe. This is a general principle, okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He does not forbid us from being fair, from being just and kind and righteous to those who do not fight us for our religion and to those who do not expel us from our home. So there are two criteria here. If you're not fighting me for my religion, you're not expelling me from your home, whoever you are, I have to be fair, I have to be just, and I have to be kind. Allah uses the word bir. That word is used as in the context of righteousness towards one's parents. So we must be righteous to all people and fair to all people. Because usually what the neoliberals do, what the postmodernists do, they say, you don't believe in that we should have rights, you don't believe in our views, therefore this means you're violent against us. Or this means that you don't want us to exist, you want us annihilated. And this is a ridiculous argument just because we don't agree with a set of rights, and we don't agree with a certain worldview, it doesn't mean we want you annihilated. No, we want you to live amongst us, so we give you the opportunity to show you the truth of Islam with rahmah, with mercy, and with hikmah. Is this clear? And this is a narrative that you need to adopt as well, because this is how they're going to try and frame the discussion. Oh, you're not being inclusive. We accept you. We give you your mosques. We give you your prayer. We give you your Ramadan. Every McDonald's in this country is halal. Right? So they're going to throw the inclusivity card. And you have to be able to say that, well, you draw your lines. Your lines are here. Our lines are here. And we believe our lines are right because they come from the one who knows everything and is a source of all goodness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't come across as if your inclusivity narrative includes everyone. It doesn't. You draw your line somewhere. And we would ask you, who draws the line and where? Is this clear? All right. So let me give you a statement. You ready for the statement? Drum roll. Duff roll. It's the statement of secularism. Church and state must be separate. That's the truth claim, okay? Church and state must be separate. Put your hand up. Let me tell you what the key assumption here is. There's no right or wrong. I'd rather you make the mistakes now than make them outside. Yes, Qasim. Qasim, 13-year-old, handsome, intelligent boy. Remember you from yesterday, the front line in the masjid, giving a really good answer. And he's here again in the front line, 13-year-old boy. His name is Qasim. Remember this name. Qasim. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Do you know what he just said? He just said the assumption here is that religion cannot govern. That religion doesn't have the ability to do politics. That's beautiful. That's actually right. Because what secularism does, it projects itself onto religion. This is a form of metaphysical narcissism. It's a metaphysical narcissism. I'm the only one who can do with political affairs. Anything else other than me is nonsense, right? So you're actually right. And academics frame it the way you just done it. They call it a form of metaphysical narcissism. Excellent. Excellent. What's another assumption? Church and state must be separate. Yes. Okay, so he assumes that your religious life, your personal religious values, cannot extend into the public political sphere, or they cannot be referenced with regards to the public political sphere. Yes, but there's another assumption behind that as well. Why would they even say that in the first place? And it's because of what Qasim said. They assume that religion does not have the ability to govern and to do politics. What's another assumption of the statement? Church and state must be separate. Yes, brother. Okay, it's very similar to what Qasim said. You're saying basically the same thing. Religion cannot fulfill the needs of humanity. It can only deal with the personal affairs, not the public affairs. Okay? But there's an assumption that is different to that as well. Yes.
Perhaps there's an assumption that the state has the better interests of the citizens than the religion or the church.
Good. Yes, this is a good way of framing it. That it assumes that the church, that the state, actually can govern. It assumes that secularism has the ability to deal with people's problems from a social political perspective. Because remember, it's not only one way. They're not only saying, oh, church or religion cannot deal with public affairs. They also say, well, we can also, secularism can deal with the political affairs. All right, let me give you another statement. So you practice the understanding that everything has an assumption. Right, let's think of another truth claim and unpack its assumptions. Actually, someone give me a truth claim in all of these. Give me politics, philosophy, religion. Give me a truth claim that you hear sometimes. We're going to go through this, but let's do it now anyway. Love is love. Love is love. What are you so evil for? You backward barbaric Muslims. Well, you know, you loveless people. No love. Let people love who they want. You know, Obama said this, isn't it? Love is love. This is actually a rhetorical slogan. It's aimed to be a rhetorical trap. And sometimes we have to be able to turn the tables on and unpack some of the assumptions of love is love. So how can we now show the assumptions, the false assumptions of love is love? You hand up. People, someone new. Yes, sir.
They are assuming that if you differ, you can't show mercy.
It assumes that if you're different, you can't show mercy. So it assumes that just because you disagree with the LGBTQ plus ideology, that you don't have a sense of compassion for your fellow human. Yeah, it does. But I think that's a secondary assumption. What do they actually are implying? What are the key assumptions of the statement, love is love? Yes, brother.
They seem sometimes not for example, voting voters, why don't we take it further?
Okay, so the brother said something very good there. Well, love is not always love. You're assuming that what you're loving should be loved in the way that you want to love it, you dirty animal, right? These people are nasty humans. When we go through this, when you read the works of Gail Rubin, honestly, she was a fat lesbian. Nasty piece of work. In 1984, she wrote this landmark essay. It's that tea, I'm telling you. Wallahi, I told you, this tea is spiked. Every time I have the South African tea, something happens. So, apologies in advance. One of the uncles, the Mashayikh, said, there's a chef who blows into it, yeah? I wonder what he's blowing into it. I know you guys are happy, I don't think you think it's common, right? Anyway, so moving on. So, Love is not always love. If that's the case, water is water. Drink the toilet water. Right? Food is food. Eat dog food. Right? That's what you could say. Just reframe it. You're assuming that the objects of love are actually valid objects that you should love in the way that you want and to express it in a sexual way. Who gives you that moral authority? What is your moral basis? We're not going to let you to rhetorically trap us that way. Love is love. But water is water. Food is food. Right? Sorry?
Tea.
Tea, yeah. I like the way the South Africans say it. You want some tea? Yeah, man. That's some special tea going on there. So, exactly. Thank you. So, what another assumption behind the love is love argument? Yes, sir. Very good. The Sheikh said all the consequences of love should be allowed and tolerated. So are we going to allow a grown man to have a sexual attraction to a 3-year-old and express that sexual attraction and blur the lines of consent as these postmodernists are doing? If you read the works of Gail Rubin, the first 4 paragraphs of her paper, she's actually justifying this type of love. If you believe it. Because her argument was sex is very political. And sex and sexuality is always used in times of crisis. And that's why she wanted to fund this idea of why it's so important to talk about sexuality. And she basically argued that being a male and a female is repressive. Yeah. And you have Judith Butler. She's still alive, actually. She's another lesbian. Honestly, you trace these ideas to people who are not, they're not on the right side of the moral fence. And she wrote about gender performativity. Now, gender performativity is not like you perform gender like an actress or an actor, but gender performativity is basically the use of the social construct and the power structures and legal structures in society with language. For example, when a priest in England or when a legal authority says, I hereby announce you man and wife, by virtue of his authority in the political power structures and the social power structures that he represents and the language, the minute he says it, now they perform the role of man and wife. 2 minutes before that, they're not man and wife. So she uses that as an argument to show that there is no such thing as a fixed gender and fixed sexuality. You perform it in this way by virtue of language and by virtue of power in society. It's an interesting argument. But that is assumed. What does it assume? It assumes that a form of radical skepticism because she's one of the queer theorists, which is based on postmodern principles, which we're going to discuss, that there is no method to come to an objective truth. There is no method to come to an objective truth, and that there are social hierarchies that can be oppressive, and there's a misuse of power. And what the queer theorists argue is that your use of language like categories like male and female, heterosexual, homosexual, because you frame the language in that way, it's oppressive and she even continues violent. It's a form of violence. So they're very radically skeptical about categories. And they don't believe in any truth. They don't even believe in any biological essential truths. They believe they are fundamentally. I remember years ago in psychology, when I first became Muslim, I was trying to finish it off in the evening. This was like 2004 or 2003. My teacher said, and I'm sorry we're really crude, sisters, but premenstrual tension is a social construct. It's a social construct. You believe it? And I retorted to him, saying, look, I'm a man, I have my own hormones, I have emotions or whatever, it drives. I'm not going to claim that's a social construct. It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, we could unpack that later. So Good. Let's take one more. Please.
Just a quick question. We always see that there's an argument for social construct, gender being a social construct, even for example, home being a social construct.
Yes.
Why do they always keep coming back to the idea of social construct?
Yeah, we're going to unpack that in a while, but this is something very important to understand. We don't reject social contracts in totality. This is important to know. Yeah. For example, we believe that, especially in the context of sexuality, we believe in some biological traits combined with a social discourse or a social construct. There is no such thing as biological essentialists anymore. This has been treated a long time ago. So there's a combination, and we know this in the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he would say whoever emulates a woman is cursed. So we know that there are some essential biological traits or fitly traits of what it means to be a man, but this man has the ability to emulate a woman, and that emulation can happen because of language that's used in his sub-community and the power structures of his sub-community. That's not necessarily a problem. We even have this in fiqh, in a general sense. Urf, for example, which is social custom, which can be attributed to form of social construct, which is based on the use of language and the use of particular power structures in society. And they can be benign. Like in Africa, take the concept of tabarruj, displaying your charms. Like generally speaking, if women wear grey or dark navy or black, there's no tabarruj there in the UK. But maybe in some African villages, where the norm is everyone's wearing yellow, for you to start now wearing like black, you're sticking out. So they may, I'm not saying that's the case, but there may be an argument that the tabarruj is reversed now. You see, based on what? Language and social custom, which is based on the power structures, because the power structures in social discourse is not like a weight that's being pressed on your head. It's more like a grid. Yeah? So, does that make sense? So don't let them get away with that. You see, what they do, because they're radically skeptical, applied postmodernism has the principle that power is everywhere and power can be misused everywhere. Everyone can have access to power and misuse power by virtue of language and by virtue of the structures and the hierarchies of the particular society. What many of them do, like the queer theorists, they say that is the case, and because of the postmodern principle that there is no absolute truth, no objective truth, no method to formulate truth, even things like biological traits that we believe are real, they would ignore them. They would say it's a construct. That's why you even have some stupid postmodernists say that 1 + 1 is not 2. It could be 5. This is actually, it's funny, but it's dangerous, and it comes from Derrida. Derrida, for example, he had this argument about language. Language does not represent reality. Language is relational, and by virtue of those relations, you have hierarchies, and those hierarchies are oppressive. For example, what's the opposite of man? Okay, that's already oppressive. You've got man on top, what is the opposite? The way, and that's what he coined this term, phallogocentrism. Phallogocentrism is basically that language is inherently pro-masculine. It's very, you see, it's unbelievable. But we'll unpack that later. All right. So does everyone we'll go through 2 examples on unpacking assumptions. Is this clear so far? Any key questions on this point? Good. So, I don't want to show you that slide because I want this to be attractive as possible. All right, let's unpack the assumptions of the LGBTQ+ ideology. What do you think some of the assumptions are? So what is their claim? Their claim, generally speaking, is that same-sex intercourse and gender fluidity, these are perfectly fine. They are rights, and many of them would say they are legal rights and moral rights. There is nothing immoral about them. In other words, they don't have any wrong-making features. Same-sex intercourse and gender fluidity do not have any wrong-making features. That's their claim.
Same-sex intercourse is fine. Gender fluidity is fine. I can be a man today, non-binary tomorrow. I could even, potentially according to the old theories, I could be a black lesbian without looking black and without being a woman, just by virtue of me identifying. So, what's the assumptions? What are the key? There are 5 assumptions. Let's unpack them. Let's find them, then unpack them. What do you think of? Yes, sir.
My body, my first.
Yes. I own me. I own me. I have full authority of me because me is me. I own me, and I have self-ownership. That's a fun. By the way, not all of the ideologues and advocates agree with all of the assumptions. We'll give you the key assumptions that they would agree with some of them or all of them. It's a very important part. So the Shaykh is right. My body, fundamentally, I wasn't created by Allah. That's the main argument. Although there are some religious folk who adopt this ideology, and we can unpack that later. But generally speaking, they think they own the body, and therefore they could do whatever they want with their bodies as long as it's not harming. We would argue it does harm them, but that's a different discussion. They don't believe they were created, therefore they don't have any duties to this creator. Because if, as Allah says, and the Quran says, and the Sunnah say that Allah created us, Allah owns us. Therefore, He has every right to tell us what to do with our body. But they say no. I own my body. I can do whatever I want. That's the first assumption. What's another assumption of the LGBTQ plus ideology? Yes. Good. So biological traits do not dictate your sexuality and don't dictate your gender. And this is the assumption of queer theory. That your biology does not dictate your gender and your sexuality. What are the other assumptions? Yes? Very good. Very good. So they would say there's no wrong-making features. And they would refer to utilitarianism and ideological ethics. Remember what we discussed yesterday? And when we refer to that, there's no wrong-making features concerning same-sex intercourse and gender fluidity. According to our understanding of utilitarianism, our understanding of deontological ethics, this is perfectly fine. Good. What's another assumption? Yes?
The government should stay out of the bedroom, and what I do in my private time is no one else's business.
Good. The government should stay out of the bedroom. Although many government employees do not do that, for sure. Especially in the UK. Yeah? So, let me translate that in an easier way for people to understand. It is a legal right. So they believe it's an individual legal right to have same-sex intercourse and to attribute any gender identity, sexuality to myself. Good. You've actually figured out most of the assumptions. You guys are very smart. Say Alhamdulillah. MashaAllah. So, these are the 5 assumptions. Number 1, humans own their bodies. Number 2, same-sex intercourse and gender fluidity is a fundamental individual right. Number 3, same-sex intercourse and gender fluidity do not have any wrong-making features. Number 4, sexuality and desires form one's identity. And number 5, sex is not the same as gender. Sexuality is a social construct. MashaAllah, you picked most of these out for yourself in a different wording, but you understood these were the assumptions. So let's explain the assumptions a little bit. So assumption that humans own their own bodies. And this is very easy to understand. They have a kind of metaphysical bias. They believe that most of my atheists, they don't believe that Allah created them, so they don't own anything to Allah, and they believe fundamentally they own their bodies. And by the way, these assumptions can also be applied to the whole abortion debate. You know, my body, my choice. Well, And I don't believe some Muslim people actually believe that as well, especially in North America. They advocate, it's my body, my choice. Shut your mouth. This is not your body, it's Allah's. Allah owns your body, it belongs to Him, and He has every right to do what to do with it. So you have to be able to reframe it and give them the correct understanding of who they are as human beings. So, if they own their own bodies, they argue they can do whatever they want. Now, there are some religious people who believe in the LGBTQ plus ideology, and they may believe in God, but what they would say is, yes, God may fundamentally own our bodies, but He wants to do whatever we want. That would be the slight caveat from a religious perspective, yeah? And that's where you have Christians, Christianity has told you, there's no more Christianity. It's failed. It's failed humanity, to be honest. Individual right. So another key assumption is that they assume a liberal conception of rights. It's a particular conception. It's not a universal conception. If you look at the works of Professor John Charvet, he wrote a book called Human Rights and Liberal Project, and he basically also admits that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is not universal, it's actually a liberal project, it's a liberal conception of those rights. So when they say it's an individual right for me to have same-sex intercourse and for me to have, attribute any gender sexuality to myself, gender fluidity, they would say this is basically an individual right as per the liberal framework. The other assumption, there are no wrong-making features. Now we went through this yesterday. These concepts are linked together. They would say, look, there's no wrong-making features. But what they assume here is a kind of secular normative ethical theory, like utilitarianism, ethical egoism, and deontological ethics. Remember we covered this yesterday? So we would say to them, no, there are wrong-making features, and the wrong-making features is that you go against the command of Allah. That is the wrong-making feature, which we're going to unpack in a few moments, inshallah. And there's no need to repeat what utilitarianism is about. I'll just summarize it again for you. Remember, utilitarianism is the normative ethical theory that basically says you look at the consequences of a particular action, and if it maximizes happiness for the greatest number of people, it's a good action, and it basically increases ill-being for a large number of people, then that is a morally bad action. Deontological ethics is not about the consequences of an action, it's about certain criteria, rational criteria that develop in order to formulate ethical rules, in order to understand what our duties, moral duties should be. The other assumption is sex is not gender. Now this is very important. This is one of the most hardest things to understand because it's deliberately contradictory. Queer theory, right? Queer theory, this assumes something called queer theory. And this is an academia, if you believe it or not. If you go on YouTube and type in Judith Butler, you see that she talks about this, about gender performativity, queer theory, gender studies, all of this nonsense, all of this bakwas, yeah? So, queer theory was motivated by that idea, generally speaking, and it's actually a valid motivation in inverted commas. That biological essentialism is false, meaning it's just biology. Even Muslims would agree with that. So they've extended that motivation to start to think about, therefore nothing is about biology. It's all about language, and it's all about the social construct. Now, queer theory is based on two key postmodern principles: radical skepticism and social hierarchy. What is radical skepticism? Radical skepticism is the view that there is no method that you can acquire objective truth, even biological truth. These people are crazy, honestly, they're crazy. And therefore, biology and gender is a social construction perpetuated in language. The second postmodern principle is social hierarchies. That society is made of power structures and hierarchies that are fundamentally oppressive, or they can misuse their power. So what they would say is, from a queer theory perspective, is that Fixed categories like sexuality are forms of oppression. And if society dictates those categories, it's a form of oppression, and they will go as far as saying it's a form of violence. Do you believe it? Is this clear? So that's, in a nutshell, applied postmodernism and the key aspects of truth theory. They're radical skeptics, meaning there is no objective truth, including biological truths. They believe in social hierarchies, and people use language and social structures to actually oppress people. Now, we don't have to really go through this, but it's interesting. It's not, you don't have to learn this, but I felt it was interesting for you to understand the crazy ideas that postmodernism has come from certain crazy thinkers, and crazy theories come from bizarre thinkers as well. So, a key thinker is Michel Foucault. He was a French philosopher. He wrote The Order of Things, Discipline and Punish. He wrote Madness and Civilizations, and his big volume, multi-volume history of Western sexuality, or the history of sexuality. What are his key ideas? His key ideas are centered on power, and what we know to be true are just constructions of language, which he calls discourse. And his work is canonical for the great theories. Michel Foucault was a shaitan. I believe he potentially was shaitan of the human. You can read him shaitan, yeah? He's a shaitan, he's human. He used to rape Algerian boys in graveyards. Yeah? It's not to be making this up, check this out for yourself. Isn't it interesting that you trace these ideas to usually French nasty people? Yeah? And look what they're doing to the Muslims, how they're treating the Muslims. So that's one of the key ideas of Foucault. You don't have to know about Foucault or his works, but I want to give you some of the key thinkers so you will understand exactly how you can trace back these ideas, because his work on the history of sexuality is quite canonical for queer theorists. You have Jacques Derrida, another French philosopher. The French have a monopoly on sick stuff, on like destroying what it means to be human. Yeah? So he wrote the work of grammatology, writing and difference, and speech and phenomena. And what is his key ideas? Well, his key idea is that language is binary, yeah, and therefore it's hierarchical. And language does not represent reality. No language, no construction of language can represent the real world. And because language is binary, therefore it's oppressive by virtue of the hierarchy of the use of that binary language. As we said, what's opposite of male? Female. Right? What's opposite of white? Black. So therefore, white is better than black. Therefore, male is better than female. And this, therefore, forms a linguistic hierarchy that is oppressive. So Derrida had this view that language is relational. And he had two views, two coinages. He coined something called logocentrism and phallogocentrism. Logocentrism is the inherent bias in Western civilization on the use of language. Would you believe it? Would you believe that? Like, who could make that up? Like, honestly, what's wrong with this guy? So Western civilization is inherently biased because they focus on language. Yeah? Because remember, his idea is to remove language away from reality. His other idea was phallogocentrism. Phallogocentrism is that language is inherently masculine. It favors the masculine, therefore, it is inherently oppressive. This is why many postmodernists, and this is applied postmodernism, when you see people on Twitter, they would really argue about terminology and about what did you mean about this. Even worse, they don't care what you meant. They don't care. This is why, according to a Derridian understanding of language, the one who has spoken and uttered the language and the one who has understood it, they're the same, irrespective of the author's intent. Because if I, as a snowflake, has heard someone say something and I get really upset and I throw a press or blow my mouth and whatever, I don't need to say to the person, what do you mean by that? The person says, oh, I meant this, I'm really sorry. Intent is irrelevant in a Derridian framework. They would say no, that the use of this language itself, inherently, irrespective of your intent, is oppressive. You can't do anything. Do you see how bizarre this is? So, I mean, I'm going through this quickly because you don't have to know this stuff, but I want you to realize how crazy some of these ideas are. Simone de Beauvoir. Now, she was a feminist existential philosopher, and she was feminist, but she opened the door for queer theory. Because generally speaking, she had an argument that essentially says someone is not born a woman, she becomes a woman. And this allowed the idea of construction. This allowed the idea of you could make your own gender identity and sexuality. Gail Rubin, an anthropologist, she wrote The Traffic in Women, Note on the Political Economy of Sex, and the landmark piece, Thinking Sex, Notes for a Radical Theory of the Politics of Sexuality. And she basically said that the objective of family, is to reproduce gender. That's what she said. And family is oppressive. That's why these people believe parents are oppressive. That's why you have nasty transsexual people on TikTok talking to children saying, don't worry, you can talk to me. You don't have to talk to your parents, right? You've seen this, yeah? Honestly, I saw that guy out kicking the teeth. Yeah, honestly. Oof. And also, she argued that gender norms are repressive for females and for males because the use of language and the power structure, because she refers to Foucault. Remember, the Foucaultian idea of power is not something pressing on top of you, it's like a grid, and it permeates all of society, and everyone has access to it, and hierarchies misuse it. And Foucault, the discourses, that use of language that perpetuate that oppression. Then you have Judith Butler, she's a philosopher. She's actually pro-Palestinian. Like Dr. Ismail Atif, Allah bless him, big God for him. He's ill, he's got multiple sclerosis, and he's actually one of my heroes, very courageous. I found from his parents in Ramadan that he would be in bed, he can't even open or close his mouth for 2 weeks, and they had to feed him. And he produces great works for us, books, courses, and he will never tell me. And so he's a huge inspiration. So please make God for him, Allah. So her work, Gender Trouble, Feminism, and the Subversion of Identity is a key piece of work. And she argues about gender performativity. So I already mentioned this before. By gender performativity is basically not you perform your gender like an actor or an actress, but you authentically perform it and become it by virtue of the power structures of society, socialization, and the use of language. And she refers to a legal authority or a priest that says, I hereby name you or announce you man and wife. And by virtue of that political or legal authority, and by virtue of that language, they become man and wife. But 30 seconds ago, they were not man and wife. So she argues, well, there's no real main difference. It's only the power structure, the use of language. And she applies that to gender. And remember, queer theories, what did we say were the two postmodern applied principles? What was the first one? Allahu Akbar, you guys are smart. What did we unpack all the assumptions? Very smart. We're starting to judge the great over again. It's a great lesson. So, radical skepticism. What is radical skepticism? How do you frame it in a postmodern discourse sense? Yeah. Yes, there is no method to attain objective truth. So how would the queer theorists use that principle? Therefore, there is no biological truth. There are no, any truth that you claim of biology or gender is not absolute. It's not a fact. So therefore, it's subject to change, or we could challenge it, or we could disturb the discourse. That's one of the activism, by the way. Queer theorists, the key activism is not to provide any truth, it's just to disturb the language and to disturb hierarchies. Because that would facilitate a greater form of freedom. What was the second postmodern principle? Sorry? Social hierarchies, well done. There are social hierarchies that are oppressive. whether it's a masculine hierarchy, whether it's any type of hierarchy, has the potential to misuse its power. And by virtue of it being a hierarchy, it's oppressive because it tells you what could be known and not known. It tells you what is right and not right. And this is oppressive by nature, they would argue. So how would it apply to the queer theorist point of view? So apply this postmodern principle to the queer theory. We did this as 2 minutes ago. If there are social hierarchies and they're perpetuated by language, then how would the queer theorists use that postmodern principle on queer theory or gender? No, that's the Derridian logic. That's very good. But that's what we want to know. Yes.
Very much skepticism, one can't find the biological clues. So in a social hierarchy system,
Good. So you apply it to the categories of male and female, right? They would say that male and female has been perpetuated by use of the language male and female, masculine and feminine. And they would say that the power structure of the social hierarchies, as per Gail Rubin also indicated that the family of the social hierarchies is heteronormativity, yeah? Meaning gender. They use heteronormativity in a negative sense, like, oh, you're heteronormative. Because queer theory is basically wanting to disturb the normal. It's a skepticism of the normal. So if a particular structure, society, uses language in a way that gives you clean-cut categories of sex, male and female, masculine and feminine, this is a form of oppression based on that postmodern principle of social hierarchies.
why do some liberals use cis male, cis female, they, them, why do they do that?
Because they believe in the power language. So they will not say male, because that would also exclude everyone else who identifies later on as a male away from their biological traits or what they were assigned at birth. So they provide different language because for them, they always believe it's going to be a social construct. So they never believe you're going to have reality in it. Because you remember what we said about postmodern principles, what we said about queer theories, and what the Derridian understanding is, language doesn't represent reality. So no matter what language you use, or what social hierarchy you use, you're never going to have truth. But what they do is they Julius Butler mentioned this in one of the videos, and it's all shahwat. Really. Have you not seen the one who takes the desires of the Lord? It's all shahwat. It's all I just want to be free. They are chasing absolute freedom, but they're really just chasing the egos because absolute freedom is an aspect of divinity. It's their yearning for Allah, really. But what they want to become Allah, it's a form of kind of shirk in a way because they're chasing this absolute freedom. And because they believe they could never have a representation of reality, irrespective of the socialization, irrespective of the hierarchies, irrespective of the language that you use, therefore their job is to disturb it all the time. Remake it, reshape it, new language. I'm telling you, that's why they keep on adding. What's that Trudeau guy? That Trudeau guy is such a political sin. Yeah, that guy. You know, he looks like one of those, the prince of one of those cartoon characters, yeah? But he's just like, he's 3 weeks. I find him a very good politician. He's added a few more letters to the LGBTQ, now it's IA plus. They're going to keep on adding because it's part of their applied postmodern activism and queer theory activism to agitate what is normal, disturb what is normal. So if LGBTQ plus becomes normal, they're going to change it because that's part of their chase of this illusion of freedom. The more different ways of language that you have, and the more different hierarchies of the disturbance of all of these hierarchies, the removal of all hierarchies, eventually may be close to freedom. Okay, great. So we went through, you unpack these assumptions, we said what they are. Now before, I don't want to read these slides to you, so what I want you to do, what is the Islamic take on these assumptions? So the first assumption here, humans have self-ownership ultimately. We own our own bodies. We haven't been created by Creator, so we're not duty bound to Him. And therefore, there is no creator tells us what to do with what we supposedly own. And even if you're religious, so-called religious, and you believe in this ideology, LGBTQ plus ideology, they would argue, yeah, God did create us, He may own our bodies fundamentally, but we can do whatever we want. He allows us to do that. So what is the Islamic take on the first assumption?
We had that. Humans own their bodies.
Good. So Allah tells us, based on His creative agency, the Sheikh this morning he gave a bayan from Surah Maryam that Allah is, He's the Lord of the heavens and the earth. And the words Rabb means He's the creator and the nurturer. Allah is al-Khaliq. Allah is the creator, He's al-Khallaq, He's perpetually creating. The creative agency of Allah is that He owns everything. Allah is the master, owner, maker, shaper, fashioner of everything that exists, the sustainer of everything that exists, including our bodies. Our bodies are called what? It is a amana, it is a trust. Yes, we have a delegated authority to use our bodies, but we cannot do whatever we want because fundamentally our bodies belong to Allah and we can only do things with our bodies that is pleasing to Allah. Well done. All right, so the second assumption, same-sex intercourse and gender fluidity is a fundamental individual right, which is not necessarily a moral position, it's a legal position. It's a social political position of the government. So, what is the Islamic take on this? Yes, brother. Allahu Akbar. Our rights and responsibilities are given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who has the right to give us our rights? Why do we have to adopt this postmodern or liberal conception of rights? Liberalism has an assumption. It focuses on primacy on the individual. I'm sorry, we don't have to adopt that assumption. And there's reasons why we cannot adopt that assumption and reject that assumption. And we would say that Allah has the perfect right to tell us what to do with our bodies, and He is the one who gives us our rights. And this is why you start developing a really good, powerful argument to Islam, which we're going to do in a few moments. Okay, number 3. Same-sex intercourse and gender fluidity have no wrong-making features. What does Islam say about this? Yes, brother. Yes. But how does it relate to wrong-making features? That's basically saying that Allah has elevated us. And we can also debase ourselves as well. You can't infer things from that, but we want something a little bit more direct. So they're saying there's no wrong-making features. It's not immoral to have sex with the same gender, and it's not immoral to change your gender to have gender fluidity. Yes, Shannon. Creation will not continue. Yeah, that's an argument. If you project or protract their perspective, if everyone had same-sex intercourse, it's actually dangerous for humanity. That's an argument. But what does Islam say about this issue? Yes. Exactly. It goes against the divine command. And going against the divine command is the wrong-making feature. When we discussed ethics yesterday, which really relates to this, they're adopting maybe a utilitarian stance on this, or deontological stance, or a combination of both. And they're saying it's completely fine. And there are utilitarian thinkers who justify between utilitarianism and deontological ethics. Although historically, the same type of ethicists, not the same individuals, but the same type of ethicists would use these theories to say why homosexuality is actually immoral. Right? It changes. So the point here is it goes against the divine command because we would say we don't adopt your moral frame of reference. We don't adopt your normative ethical theory. We are divine command theorists, as we discussed yesterday. And the divine command is good for us and for human flourishing. The fourth assumption, sexualities and desires form one's identity. Because that's an argument from the movement here as well. That your desire to be a man if you're a woman, your desire to be a woman if you're a man, your desire to be non-binary, this is you. Yes, it's you. This is who you are. This is your fundamental identity. What does Islam say about this? Yes. Yes, Allah created us and that's what we are, but who are we? What is that? Yes. Well done. We are servants of Allah. Our main identity is the fact that we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are so many ayat that condemn following desires. So many ayat that try to make a distinction between your real identity, which is the being an abid, worshipping Allah, being here to be a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to love Allah, to obey Allah, to be humble before Him, to submit to Him, and actually follow your desires. But what they've done, they made desires as a key part of one's identity. And we fundamentally reject this. The fifth assumption, sex is not the same as gender, sexuality, and the social construct. Yes, bro. Yes, Allah created the male and female. And they're not the same, right? In actual fact, Allah talks about, you can take some of the ayat when Allah talks about pairs, and you can say it's binary. Allah created a binary world. Right? They say we're non-binary. No! Allah says different. There's a male and a female, right? And we don't adopt a radical skepticism. Remember, this is based on queer theory. We just discussed that length. We don't adopt the two postmodern principles that are applied in the queer theory context. We believe there is a method to acquire truth. So therefore, there is some truth about biology. Fine, we're not biological essentialists, as we said, and we see this in the Sunnah, but we believe in key biological traits. We combine with some social custom or socialization. And we don't follow the other postmodern principle that hierarchies are necessarily oppressive. And that the use of language is necessarily oppressive. Because Allah gives us a particular language to use to define and describe things and the meaning behind that we could use in different languages in order to understand reality. Good. So, let's focus on some ayats now. So, just going through this again very quickly. You already answered this for me, but let's just tie it all together. So, let's question these assumptions. So, with regards to humans on their own bodies, we already agree with this. No, fundamentally, Allah owns our body, He's the creator of everything. And you understand this from sort of Fatiha verse 1, Quran 43:9, Quran 23:84, Quran 6:102, Quran 10:31, Quran 11:12, verses 1 to 2, and many other ayats throughout the Quran. And don't worry, we'll give you this slide, you don't have to write the references down. The second assumption, same-sex intercourse and gender fluidity is a fundamental individual right. We say no, because Allah has the right to give us our rights. And His commands are moral commands, and also they are the commands and the principles that allow us to formulate individual rights. And even in our tradition, we have something called hukuk al-ibad, the rights of the individuals, but those rights are given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know the truth as opposed to a liberal conception of rights, because we don't have the false assumption of primacy of the individual. We have the correct assumption that Allah exists, and we can prove that Allah has every right to give us our rights and our morality because of who He is. And when you focus on His name and attributes, Allah is Al-Hakim, Al-Alim, He's Al-Bar, the source of all goodness, He's the knowing, the wise, and therefore what He commands is going to be in line with who He is, and it's always going to be good for us. As Allah says in the Quran, chapter 7, verse 28, saying indeed Allah does not order immorality. So again, just unpacking what we just discussed a little bit more. So we went through the ethics already, we did this yesterday. Yeah, so the other assumption that desires and sexuality forms one identity. No. What does Allah say in Surah Baqarah verse 158? It's such a beautiful verse actually. Allah says this is a natural way of Allah. And who is better than Allah in ordaining a way? In actual fact, other translations, which are probably more linguistically accurate, like, this is how Allah colors us, right? It's a very interesting imaginistic way of describing identity. Yeah? And we worship none by Him, but Him. So the way of Allah, the natural way, our natural identity is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also in Quran 30 verse 30, what does Allah say? That adhere to the fitrah, adhere to the natural way that Allah created us. And Allah, many ayat, shuns us following our desires. So our desires do not formulate our identity. As Allah says in chapter 28, verse 50, and who is more astray than the one who follows his desire without guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The other assumption, sex is the same as gender. We already spoke about this. I want to give you 3 ways of really dealing with the queer theorists' applied postmodern assumptions of radical skepticism and social hierarchies. The way to do it is to actually show absurdities. Because their way of dealing with this is to agitate the language and the discourse and to agitate the social hierarchies and the power. We can't really debate them from a philosophical perspective in some sense, generally speaking. Why? Because they don't believe in truth. They believe everything is a social construct. They believe everything is perpetuated in language in a Derridian sense that's already based on some kind of hierarchy that's oppressive and unjust. And language doesn't represent reality. So no matter how kind of analytical philosophy you give them, it's going to laugh at you. Now there's ways of dealing with it, but from a social perspective, it's just easy just to show the absurdity. It will just rattle them. It will know the inconsistency of the applied postmodern principles. So I think these identities are developed here. So, and I've seen this on social media, and actually it works. So you can just say to them, okay, the logical implication of what you're saying, or the implication of what you're saying, is I am a cat. I'm a cat. I don't have to have any biological traits of being a cat, because those things are perpetuated in the social discourse and the language and the hierarchy. And I can perform this identity, this perversion, making my own social hierarchy and language. I'm a cat, and my dad is a lion. Honestly, there's nothing inconsistent with queer theory and applied postmodern principles that you can't say you're a cat. Second absurdity, and I'm sorry for this, I'm a black lesbian. If biological traits are not dictate my identity, I don't have to look black. And I don't have to look like a woman. So this is one thing I don't have to change, that obviously I'm a woman, I'm a man. So I'm a black lesbian. Another absurdity is to actually get to define what people are actually being fluid about. What are they transitioning into? What is the thing they're actually defining? And they would argue, oh, you want an essentialist definition of male or female. No, we want a definition. And they can't even give you that. So there needs to be a kind of social movement in some sense to keep on agitating this discourse in this way, because it will show the absurdities. Also, finally, the same-sex intercourse and gender fluidity does not have any wrong-making features. You already discussed this. We talked about the assumption of teleological ethics or utilitarianism or teleological ethics. And we said, no, it's about Allah's command. Allah has the universal moral claim. He has the moral picture. He's the ultimate judge of all duty towards him. And we spoke about this, I think, yesterday. So let's deal with some contentions, then you do your quick case study scenarios. Then we get some questions. So they would argue after this, okay, you're right. We got assumptions, you got assumptions. You religious people, don't force this down our throats. Well, thank you very much. It's exactly what we want to do. Because you are forcing it down our throats. The minute you're able to get them, they have certain assumptions that could be questioned, and that we are under no epistemic, meaning no truth or knowledge duty or obligation to accept that assumption, and we have our own assumptions that we can actually prove to be true. Once they accept that, then what you say to them, you have no legal, social, or moral right to try and shove this down our throats. And this is very important, because they try and frame the discourse as if we are the oppressors, but actually that is not the case. Love is love, we have already dealt with this. Water is water, drink from the toilet bowl. Sex is sex, make love to a corpse. Food is food, eat my vomit, or a dead person. Right? It's a nonsensical, rhetorical trap. Remember, love is intentional and directional, brothers and sisters in the Shire. To truly love someone, you have to be dedicated to their well-being. And this is the prophetic understanding of love. And now he speaks about this, that you want the goodness and the guidance. You're dedicated to the well-being and the happiness. But what is well-being? What is happiness? We know people will truly be happy if they obey Allah. Right? And that's the rhetorical trap they're trying to make you fall into. Don't fall for it. Say no. You don't even know what love is in the first place. You think love is identifying as a particular gender that's going to destroy their bodies and destroy their lives and remove themselves away from the mercy and barakah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is actually a form of oppression. That's what we should turn the tables. You're oppressing people. Your love is not love, it's oppression. Our love is true love. It liberates you from your desire and it brings you back to your fitrah, which is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And our understanding of love is intentional, directional. I don't want you to be a slave of your desires. I want you to be a slave of Allah that will make you, liberate you and free you from the ephemeral nature of reality. Ruh, the soul, shares the same root as the word raha, which means liberty and ease. It's as if the ruh wants to achieve that liberty, and it can only be done so by what? By worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Iqbal, the famous poet of the East, said, this one sajda, this one prostration frees you from 1,000 prostrations. Allahu Akbar. So we want to show them that we have true mercy for you. We have true well-being, and we will be loving towards you. Because we believe what is good for your well-being and what is good for your dunya and akhirah is to really find your true identity, not to be a slave to your desires, and your true identity is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So don't frame it as love is love, because if you could just say water is water, drink from the toilet bowl, sex is sex, sleep with a corpse, and food is food, eat a dead person. And that's how you agitate the discourse, and you explain it as best as possible. These are rhetorical traps and the slogans, but in your conversations you can unpack them. Okay, so finally, my dear brothers and sisters and mashayikh, so how do you call them to Allah? And remember, you get a logical pattern in what we've been teaching in the past few days. Like the Ustad Muhammad Hijab was talking about, we have our own assumptions too, but we can prove them. We don't believe in the primacy of the individual, we believe in the symbiotic relationship, between a complementary relationship between the individual, society, individual, which is implied by the Quran and the Sunnah. And we know this to be true because we could prove Allah and prove revelation. Similar to this, so you could use the same Muhammad Hijab-esque narrative onto this by linking it to the foundation. So yes, these are your 5 key assumptions, and probably many more. We have our take on these assumptions. This is why we believe the assumptions are wrong. And we believe these assumptions are true because they come from a true foundation, because whatever comes from haq is haq, absolutely. Whatever comes from truth is true. And this is why not only should you expose that they have assumptions, they could be challenged, we have our own take on the assumptions. And not only should you challenge the postmodern principles, queer theory, and everything that you did, which was fantastic. You picked up the assumption itself, and you even challenged the assumption. You showed the Islamic assumptions. You did most of the work today. We should thank Hijab for to give advice on how to be a better teacher. So it's not going to be more attractive and get you to answer. That is my teacher in that sense. He was actually a real teacher as well. He got sacked though. It wasn't his fault. And look, Allah didn't think much better. He's teaching the whole world about how he is Islam. So, yeah. It was matrix. So, you call people to Islam. You don't just challenge assumptions, say that they have assumptions and the false or correct assumptions, and we can challenge them intellectually. No, you also say, we believe these assumptions are true because they come from a true foundation. In order for you to understand why these assumptions that we have are true, you have to understand the concept of Islam. Remember the statement. In order for you to understand why these assumptions are true, you have to understand the concept of Islam. Allah exists. He is one. He is worthy of worship. His revelation is the Quran, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is the final prophet. and he repeats it, it sticks right inside. You should even write this down. And then, because when you write it down, you're going to formulate it in your own way as you practice this and develop this in your journey. In order for you to understand why these assumptions are true, you have to understand the concept of Islam. Allah exists, He is one, He's worthy of worship, His revelation is the Quran, and the Prophet is the final prophet, and we could show you that this is true. And wherever comes from truth is Allahu Akbar. Excellent. So that's it. This is the end of the first presentation. Because of time, we're not going to do the scenarios, we could do them at the end if we have time. But just to summarize in a minute, we want to reclaim the rainbow. Every truth claim has assumption. LGBT plus narrative of same-sex intercourse and gender fluidity is perfectly fine. That has its own assumptions, and we unpacked, actually you unpacked 5 assumptions today. We explained why they have those assumptions. We explained Islam's stance on those assumptions, and went into queer theory to see how irrational and incoherent it is at the same time. And we showed how we can bring people to Islam by using our assumptions. And we dealt with some key contentions that they could come up with, such as love is love, and so on and so forth. And you unpack the assumptions by referring to the Islamic tradition, to divine command theory, and to Islam, to the Quran and Sunnah. And now you're able to, when you develop this further, to basically discuss with people and say to them, you have certain assumptions. This is why you have these assumptions, we understand. This is why what our take is on those assumptions. This is why we believe they're wrong, especially queer theory, right? And we believe we are right because whatever comes from truth is true and our foundation is true. And let me explain that to you. Stand in the possibility that you're wrong and stand in the possibility that our assumptions are true and they come from al-Haq himself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So hopefully this gives you a framework and a structure to understand the discourse, to understand the assumptions, to understand what our take is on this, and to understand how to combat these assumptions, but also at the same time to bring them back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Jazakallah. So we're going to have a quick break, yeah? Have a quick break, and then we're going to have a start, and then we'll get time at the end to have the collective Q&A. Allah bless you. Jazakallah.
At what point is someone now identified as gay? Let me give you some examples. Right? Let's say a Muslim person, Muslim man or Muslim woman. She or he, they live in a Muslim family, and then they know it's haram to be gay. They don't even want to be in a relationship with the opposite gender. Yet, they may be aroused, sexually aroused, by the idea of same-sex attraction. Is this the threshold for homosexuality? It's debatable. I'm not saying it is. I have a friend of mine, let's start with a little joke. I had a friend of mine, it's not a very crude joke, it's forgive me, I'm a very modest man. And he was telling me about a situation that he witnessed some lesbians, doing something hard. And you would be very surprised. Most men, heterosexual men, would be aroused by that. Now you might think this is against the fitra, but according to statistics, if you show, and I'm being very explicit here, but for full reason, if you show a man, two women being promiscuous with each other, even if he is heterosexual, he's not gay. He's not interested in gay. He believes it's wrong. It will have an impact on him. So much so, he was telling me when he saw that, and then he came out to speak against the LGBT community. And he was saying, the LGBTQs, they need to be dealt with. And then his friend told him, brother, it's called LGBT. He said, look, you've got the L, because of what's happened to him. He had a traumatic experience. He's almost giving these guys a free ride. The truth of the matter is, it's possible for a heterosexual person, and this is my point, to be aroused by this kind of thing. And in fact, it doesn't have to be gay. This is important because many Muslims, they come to me on a pastoral level and they say, I think I'm gay. I say, why do you think you're gay? Because I saw this and I saw that, and it had an impact on me. That's not an evidence that you're gay. It's just an evidence that your fitrah has been corrupted. You don't have to identify as gay. You're not gay because you have these feelings. So long as you don't act them out, from an Islamic perspective, this is very important. Don't act them out. Don't try and find someone from the same gender. If you have those thoughts, you have those feelings, it doesn't mean you're gay. Even one person who came to me, this is not a joke, by the way, he says, if you love, that's your thing. And he had a huge beard. And he said to me, listen, I want to speak to you privately. I said, oh. And it was in speakers. He said, this is the problem. He said, look, you're looking around, kept looking around. There's a lot of people asking. He said, let's go over there. He said, look, I'm not attracted to women. He kept looking around. So tell me why. He said, look, I can't get married. He said, I can't get married because I'm not attracted to women. I'm not attracted to them. I don't see how I can be with them. So I said, well, that's very interesting. I said, are you attracted to men? He said, yes, I am. He goes, yes. So I said, okay, interesting. I said, are you attracted to them only, or do you want to be romantic? Because this is important. You can be sexually attracted to someone, but not romantically interested in them. It's a very interesting fluidity. Like they distinguish between romantic relationships and sexual relationships. To be in a relationship with someone, you need two things. You need sexual attraction and romantic attraction. He said, no, I don't really want to be like in a relationship with a man. It's very interesting dynamic here. We've already solved half this problem. Because he thought he was gay. This is a Muslim. He thought he was gay. But then you realize he's not fully gay. He's just got gay tendencies. You see what's happening here? Because he would rather be with a woman from a romantic perspective. Yes? But he would rather be with a man from a sexual perspective. So how do we solve the problem? I'm no psychologist. Even though I've spoken to many, and they have something called conversion therapies, where they convert people. I said, look, if you saw a woman who was like a bodybuilder, she's got more what's called androgynous traits, would you find her more attractive? He said, he thought about it. He said, yes, I would actually. I said, okay, this is interesting. Because we already solved half your problem by showing you why you're not gay from one perspective, which is the romantic perspective. Now we're figuring something out about you, which is that there are some women you'd be more attracted to than others. I said to him, listen, brother, you drink coffee. He said, what's this got to do with it? I said, you drink coffee? He said, yeah, I drink coffee. I said, do you remember the first time you ever had coffee? He said, yeah, it was a very good time. I don't like it. I said, how many times do you have to drink it before you start liking it? He said, about 5 times, 10 times. So the same thing with women. No, I mean, I said, the same thing, we might not like it now. No, but this is a fact. When I started to look at the studies, think about it, the LGBT movement is telling us sexuality is what? Fluid. That's what they say. We have this fluid sexuality. Well, if it's true that we have a fluid sexuality, and let's agree with them for the sake of argument, then that means you can come out of being homosexual. You can change being gay. If what they're telling us, think about it, right? The homosexual is telling us we have a fluid sexuality. Sexuality is fluid. We say, fine, we agree. Sexuality can change. We agree with that. We agree with that. And there's environmental factors which can change your sexual preference. But if sexuality can change, then you also have to believe in the possibility of changing it from homosexuality towards heterosexuality. You can't say, oh, sexuality can change only when it means for bisexuality or homosexuality. So, for example, if you know these gays, sometimes they have these stories, like you know how we have conversion stories. We bring a convert and tell us how he became Muslim. They have the same thing about coming out of the closets. And I've seen some of those stories. And some of them said, I didn't really know I was gay, and then after this happened, and I had a few experiments at university, and then I became gay. I'm thinking, wow, he became gay. Which means a gay person can become straight. Yeah, you cannot have the cake and eat it both. If you're telling me you can become gay, then surely you can become straight. And if you can become straight, that means you should have the freedom to become straight. And that's what conversion therapy comes. So, first and foremost, from the Muslim perspective, this idea that sexuality is rigid, that if you have gay tendencies, you cannot remove them, you're born that way, and then the Imam will tell you this is your test. Yes, it's your test, but you can change your sexuality. You can change your sexual preferences. Many of you may have, sorry to say, and be specific, I'm not trying to be personal, but have already changed your sexual preferences. Yani when you were younger, you like something, and then 5 or 10 years, you like something else. I'm not talking about man and woman, I'm talking about within the woman. If it's possible like that, then it's possible like this. So this is the first point. Now that's from a psychological perspective. The reason why I brought this to the table is because it's important for us to understand as the Muslim community. We have 2 things to deal with: moral justification, people saying it's right and wrong, and psychological pastoral settings. So people within our own community saying we're gay. How do you deal with those guys? What I'm saying to you with those guys is the first thing you must do, and you don't have to be a psychologist, you don't have to be a psychiatrist, you don't have to be Freud, you don't have to be Carl Jung. The first thing you have to do is get them to admit, talking about Muslim people, you get them to admit that it is possible to change your sexual preferences. If you get them to admit that, the battle is half won. You speak to a person who say I have homosexual tendencies, listen, is it possible? Do you think it's possible? Everything starts with possibility. The moment they say it's possible, then when there's a will, there's a way. Then you start bringing them spiritual antidotes, you start giving them psychological cues, you give them this one, you give them that one, you give them the coffee example, you give them whatever you like. But then you've got something to work with, you see. So that's the first thing. Now, that's one group of people that stay within the fold of Islam because they're not denying, they're not saying it's haram. Or sorry, they're not saying it's halal. They're not saying homosexuality is halal. We have to deal with them in a specialized manner. This is one grouping of people. You see? And then we have to break down for them the difference between romantic attachment and sexual attachment and these things and really get to know it and try to work with them. This requires training. And in South Africa, you have a greater freedom to do this than anywhere in the West. This is one of the great advantages of being a South African. In the West, it's illegal. You cannot do this. You cannot say this in the West. They've banned it. They've called it, it's called conversion therapy. It's illegal. They will not provide it. You guys can provide this. And if you don't have to for completely professional service, it will be even better if you can get a psychologist or someone who's a counselor or something like that who can synthesize what they already know with these principles. Even better. So the first point to note is that you have a great advantage in that. You may not have this advantage for long. The government may change the situation. I don't know about the ANC, what they're going to do. I mean, in 10, 15, 20 years, the West might give them a very big bribe. I mean, if the man on the motorway, if you give him £5, he goes away. Imagine if they give them $5 million. Bank conversion therapy. Here you go. Biden gives it. You'll see the same people that were talking about Mandela talking about LGBT in a strong way. It's the truth. And Mandela would have not liked that thing. You know, the ANC of the past would reject the ANC of the future. But what I'm saying is, beware and take advantage. So today what I'm going to be doing is why I'm bringing liberalism again. Because one of the main ways, Hamza mentioned some of the theories, which are important theories that they would not even be aware of. But it's true that these ideas are coming from postmodernism. But you'll be surprised to find, or maybe you won't be surprised to find that a lot of these justifications actually come from liberalism. Like if you ask the average person in the British public or the American public or the South African public, yes, I don't know about the South African public, hopefully I think there's a lot of people that don't agree with that. But let's just say some people from the South African public, you ask them, do you agree that homosexuality should be allowed in a couple of society? They may say, yes, we agree, no, we don't agree. If they say, yes, we agree, they'll say, why? Because this person is not harming anybody else. That is the main reason you'll find that they give. It's not my business, he can do his thing, he's not harming me. Huh? He's not harming me, why are we getting involved? What is that? That's liberalism. That's social liberalism. So I want to remind you of liberalism and then tell you how you can use some of the arguments to attack this line of reasoning from a liberal perspective. Because this is the most common way people will justify themselves. So let's go to the next one. Social liberalism. Social liberalism can be defined by the harm principle, okay? And the harm principle basically says you can do whatever you want so long as you don't harm anybody else. Now let me tell you how this came about. Jeremy Bentham is this guy in England, yes? He is the guy who wrote about utilitarianism. And Hamza mentioned utilitarianism, yes? Which is about the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So they say this, they say that we try to make as many people happy in society. What do we mean by happy? This is what they mean. They mean that we want to increase pleasure in the society and decrease what? Pain. Whatever increases the most pleasure for the society is the good one. And whatever decreases the most pain and increases the pleasure is the best thing. So some people said, okay, Jerry Bentham, he's the one who formulated this, and then they found some problems with it. They said, look, this means that you get one woman. This is not my example, it's the traditional example. Get one woman and you get 10 men. And they, sorry to say, this is what they gang rape her. Because if you think about it from the utilitarian perspective, 10 men are having pleasure, one woman is getting paid. So they said, which one is worse? They said, this is actually illegitimate. Then John Stuart Mill said, no, this is wrong. This is wrong. So he said, in fact, what we should do to remove this is the harm principle. You can do whatever you want, so long as you don't harm anybody else. So the gang rape scenario was removed. Does this make sense? So no one that have this problem. Say, look, so long as you don't harm anybody else, then it's okay, you can do whatever you want to do. So they solved John Stuart Mill solved the problem that Jeremy Bentham had in his. So social liberalism, which is what every country in the world today believes in effectively, is based on this principle. If you understand this principle, you understand everything. I went to my home country, Egypt, which is also in Africa, and I was speaking to the taxi driver in Alexandria, which is where I'm from. And this topic came up. He doesn't know who I am or probably you are also. He doesn't know, he's smoking a cigarette, putting his music, this and that, talking loudly, this and that. And then this topic of homosexuality came up and goes, look, man, so long as they don't harm anyone else, why am I going to get involved? And then as soon as he said that, something triggered within me. I said, do you know where you got that information? It was just common sense. Common sense. This came from John Stuart Mill. This is hard to explain, but you don't understand what I'm saying. This is a man called John in England in the 1800s did this, and then after the people started accepting it, it was put into the documents and this and that, and it went into the movies, it went into the sitcoms, it went into the Egyptian press, and that's why it came to you. Because now the Egyptian press has been westernized. And so they're using this as well. So it's going into the Muslim camp. I'm trying to explain the genesis of what is inside here. It didn't come from nowhere. If this guy was born 100 years ago, he wouldn't say this to me. He doesn't even know where the idea came from in his mind. He's like, yeah, whatever. I usually give these guys a tip. I gave him a little tip. And that was going on with people driving me around, and I'm probably not going to mess with any stuff on the line. But anyway, this is where it came from. James Mill and Jeremy Bentham. By the way, James Mill was John Stuart Mill's dad. So imagine they were best friends. I mean, his dad, James Mill, and Jeremy Bentham were good friends. So the ideas of utilitarianism was in the household. You see, we always see with these people, it's all like tradition. The ideas go around this, we're talking about it and stuff like that. So they were friends. The harm principle was put in place to prevent the gang rape scenario we just mentioned, right? Next slide. So this is what the question, of course, we're going to ask is what? What we're going to ask. So they're saying you can do whatever you want so long as you don't harm anybody else. What are we going to say? What should we say?
That's your logical proof.
Yes, good man. So what's your proof for that? You're making an assertion here, yeah? You're telling us, look, this is what you're saying. You're telling us what's right and what's wrong is based on the idea that you can do whatever you want as long as you don't harm anyone else. That's what you're telling us. No problem. You give me the proof for that. Because you know what this is based on? Bentham says it himself in his book. It's based on the idea that you have two gods. He said this in his book. He says you only have two gods. The God of pain and the God of pleasure. Really what he wants to say is you have one God, which is God of pleasure. And Allah refuted this in the Quran. Can you imagine how timeless and amazing the book of Allah is? What Allah says, have you seen the one who takes his desires as his God? The religion of the Gharb, of the Western people, is that they take their own desires as God. We mentioned yesterday the promise of the individual. This is linked to it. Of course, you could say, from one perspective, it's the individual, but they want to prioritize as many individuals as possible. The way they do that is utilitarians. So we want to make sure that you express yourself. If you're gay, you must enjoy yourself. Hopefully no one cuts that. And Freud wrote a book called Civilization and Its Discontents. Yes. Well, that's the whole point. It says that you cannot suppress anything. So there's two assumptions here. Can you imagine this? Yeah? Assumption one is that you can do anything you want, so long as it's not harming anyone else, that's where morality comes. This is based on something called the hedonistic principle. The hedonistic principle, John Locke mentioned it. Hedonism is to act according to your desires. That's what it is. They don't, by the way, it's not like a criticism. They mention it in their own books. John Locke, even before John Stuart Mill, said liberalism is based on the hedonistic principle. It's based on the idea that you can do whatever your heart desires. That is what liberalism is. So they have the hedonistic principle, they have the harm principle, and then they have the utility principle, which is the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. That's 3 assumptions. Now, how do they prove any of those? So John Stuart Mill actually has a chapter where he tries to prove it, because he knows people asking this question. So please prove it, the harm principle. And this is what he says. Yes. He says, the proof. This is John Stuart Mill telling us his proof. It's the answer to that question. He said, the proof capable of being given that an object is visible is that people actually see it. The only proof that a sound is audible is that people hear it. And similarly, with the other sources of our experience, in like manner, I apprehend the sole evidence it is possible to produce that anything is desirable is that people actually desire it. Can you believe this is what he's saying? He's meant to be one of the greatest minds in Western history. He's saying, look, how do we know we hear anything? Because we hear it. How do we know we see anything? Because we see it. This is something about it's not really. How do we know we desire anything? Because we desire it. No one is saying we don't desire it. I'm saying we're asking why should our lives be based on what you desire? He called this the desirability proof. The proof of desire. Because you desire, therefore you should desire. But this is I mean, even Western philosophers say this is arguing in a circle. It's called circular reason. You cannot prove a thing by a thing. So if I say, look, how do you prove that you're so tall? I say, because I'm so tall. What I should be saying is, how do I prove I'm so tall? Oh, look, get the meter, put it here, let's see how tall I am. I use a measuring stick to prove my height. You see, how do I prove that this water's, I don't know, 500 milliliters, yeah? I don't know, I'll put it in a jug of 500 milliliters. How do I prove that I weigh 115 kilos? Which I do. I step on the scale. And this is 125, I'm 90, yeah? What do we do? So that's how I prove, through an outside measuring agency. This man is telling us the way to prove the desirability principle is because we desire it. This makes no sense, which means what? They have no proof. If this is their greatest mind answering our question, imagine your layman in the streets. They will have no chance whatsoever. And I've tried it. And they get agitated, angry, this and that. But how do you prove that we should live based on our desires? Simple, so simple question, isn't it? Why should we do what we want to do? Why is that the right thing to do? Oh, because what? Yeah, please. Because what? There's no answer. There's actually no answer to this question. So once you ask them this question, get to the bottom of their assumption, you've already won the argument. It's a very quick way to win the argument. All you have to do is ask the homosexual. Why? How can you prove? A, that you should do whatever you like, so long as you don't harm anyone else. B, that constitutes right and wrong. Can you see how easy that is? So because it's so easy, I'm going to give you 3 minutes only to speak to the person next to you, and do a role play with the person next to you. One of you is going to be the gay, sorry to say. And one of you is going to be the Muslim respondent. Okay? So one of you is going to antagonize and one of you is going to respond. Okay? I'll 3 minutes from now, and then we'll have some maybe I'll You said 3 minutes, so I'm trying to. I think we gave you like 7. Let's just take 3 examples, and then we'll move on. How about you? What's your name? Huh? See a lot. What's your age? 30. Oh, 13 was that. Okay, let's do it. Let's turn on the gay guy, yeah? And you're the Muslim. So, why is it that you're religion? You don't accept that. Why don't we do anything more than this?
One never say LGBT.
I don't believe in your God. I'm an atheist. Huh? Why is what I'm doing wrong? Why don't I do anything I want to do?
How do you choose whoever made?
Okay, I like that. Let's go into Tawheed, but let's stick with this. This is good. This is a legitimate path. Stick with this. What's the question I want you to ask?
How was the world made?
Now, before the world made. So what am I saying? What am I saying here? I'm saying that you can do whatever you want as long as you don't harm anyone else. This is my assumption. So yeah, but I can influence them to be gay. That's a good thing, my boy. Have you seen the late Barbie movie? So remember, you want to challenge their assumptions. Okay? Go on. So what's the question I want you to ask?
So now,
How do I something?
how do you
Prove what?
okay?
That's something that you have to see. How do you prove? No, not you don't harm anyone. Some, and nearly there. Give it a little bit more. How do you prove that you can do whatever you want so long as you don't? That's the one. See, look, it's good. That's why it's important to get to do this. Yes, 13 years old. Mashallah, very good. But I see that he's very clever. He's ready to jump. He's ready. He's firing. It's a good one. And you've got good temperament. Mashallah. We'll do one more example, guys. I don't want to go for the youngsters all the time, but maybe you later on. Yeah? Later on. How about you, man? Actually, you know what? This is too close proximity. You in the middle there, okay, move close. Yeah. So tell me now. I'm going to pretend to be like more sober, okay? Yeah? I'll say, listen. Why is it wrong that a person can be gay so long as they don't harm anyone else? What's the problem with that? That's why I believe.
Well, the first part is, are you assuming that it's okay to do something so long as you're not harming anyone else?
Yeah, of course. It's the free society. We live in South Africa. We're a land of ex-apartheid. If you want to restrict me, you should put gays in one area and lock them up. Is that what you want to see? Yeah.
So the response would be, why are you assuming that it's okay to do with one as long as you're not harming anyone? And why is it only just
Good. Excellent. See, one question, two questions, what do you need in these situations? Honestly, they will stutter. They will be on the back foot. There's no way this guy was stuttering. John Stuart Mill. Look what he's saying. This is what he's answering. If the top guy is stuttering, what would the lady do? Then he's following. So this is very well done. Good. Yeah. Let's go to the next slide. So we mentioned here. They said it's not a proof, so it must be an axiom. An axiom, conveniently, is something which requires no proof. Okay? But there's no proof that's an axiom. There's no proof that's an axiom. So it's an issue which has no proof, and this is where your strongest argument lies. I think this is the last slide. Our argument continue. Okay. Look. There are a few assumptions as well. The humanistic principle assumes a kind of ethical equilibrium, thus, that everyone acts according to their own interests. But sometimes we find human beings acting altruistically, people doing things for other people's interests. Now you could argue they're doing it in their interest for their own interest. You could argue this. But still it's an assumption. And this is an argument that James Mill tried to put forward, who's John Stuart Mill's father. You can read that in your own time. It's not something which is really that important. Let's go to the next slide. And we talked about the greatest good for the greatest number of people, okay? And ethical egoism, by the way, ethical egoism means, ethical egoism, hedonism, my words of life. Ethical egoism is the idea that you should do what's in your best interest. You should do. Now, there is a difference between psychological egoism and ethical egoism. For example, you can make a strong case that human beings are very selfish. You can make this case. You can make a case that human beings do things according to their own interests, and that might be a very strong case. But there's a difference to saying that human beings should do things according to their own interests. The key word being should or ought to. That makes it moral. Now, I want to bring something to your attention. It's a good thing that Hamza mentioned this yesterday. In Western ethics, really, you guys have couples, yes? Actually, let me ask you, I think it's better to ask. There are three major branches of Western ethics. Who knows what they are? Yes?
Liberalism, hedonism, atheism.
No, they fit within the three branches. You talk about meta ethics, if you remember. Yes?
Social, political.
No, these are different groupings altogether, yes. Yes. Teleological ethics, deontological ethics, and virtue ethics. Another way of putting it is this way, okay? According to Western ethicists, there's three ways of describing morality. What is morality? Right and wrong behavior. What is right and what is wrong? According to Western ethicists, for example, John Mackey wrote a book called Ethics. It's one of the magnum opuses of this field. He's an atheist. And there are three branches of ethics. Three. And I'm going to tell you this for a reason. It's very important, yes? One of them, we say teleological, we say I'm going to consequentialist. Consequentialist ethics. And that is, Hamza told us yesterday, that something is good or bad according to what? The consequences. Yes? That is consequences. That is consequentialist ethics. What consequences in particular? That's a question that they don't have an answer to, by the way. Mostly it's economic. They say whatever brings the most welfare, for example. Sam Harris says whatever brings the most welfare for humanity. Money, profit, taking people out of poverty. These are good ones. I don't disagree with that, by the way. But ultimately, what makes something right and wrong, they say it's the consequences. The exact opposite of that is what's referred to as deontological ethics. And one of the biggest names of that, if you remember, was who? Plus points here. Yes. Yes. Manuel Kant. Yeah. He said you can never lie. He said you can never break promises. You should never commit suicide. Why? Because if everybody did it, the society would be dysfunctional. That was his reasoning. The response to him was, so let me put you in a situation. Let's say a woman is in a house and her husband is hiding from a murderer, mass murderer. He knocks on the door, he says, is your husband home? Is your husband home? So I can kill him. So I can slaughter him. According to Immanuel Kant, she has to say yes to that. She cannot lie about the situation. And of course, some women will say that anyway. Finish him off. He's been giving me a hard time, that guy, you know? That tyrant. Let me take a look at that knife, it's not sharp enough. Take this one now. So Immanuel Kant, he didn't see anything. He had some very interesting insights. I mean, he said that, and I agree with this point to some extent. It's very beautiful, poetic, and eloquent way. Is that if ever wasting potential, that you shouldn't waste your potential, because if everyone wastes their potential, you will see innovation in the next generation. That's a very nice way of putting it. It's a very good way. However, the idea of what he calls hypothetical imperative, which is translated into something called a categorical imperative, that if everyone done it, who assumes that if everyone done it, that's how we should derive the morality. In other words, even a categorical imperative or deontological ethics is unproven. He just says if everyone does it, if everyone does it. Yes? Which is why I don't like arguments that say, for the sake of argument, if there are so many gays, if everyone was gay, there would not be the continuation of human species. Because who says everyone's going to be gay? Someone can argue that easily. And who says that we should base our morality on what everyone will do? Similar arguments are made, by the way, on polygamy. So if every man married every woman, there'd be this many women in the world as surplus. What about those countries with more men? There's now countries like India, I think it's got more men than women or something. The argument fails. Flat on its face. It's not a good argument, actually. I personally don't like it. Because it assumes a kind of hypothetical or categorical imperative that everyone's going to do a certain thing. You see? So not everyone's going to do a certain thing, and the assumption that everyone's going to do it, therefore we'll see if everyone did it, what society would look like, is a false assumption. But these are the two things. You've got consequentialist morality and categorical imperatives, or you say deontological. Virtue ethics is not prescriptive. It's not prescriptive. It doesn't give you do and do not do. It just tells you these are virtues that you must have, or between the two extremes you have. Yeah? So now let's assess homosexuality on both of those. Because the thing is, we are Muslims. Of course, we can say we don't believe in homosexuality. I can get you the ayah of the Quran. If you're a Christian, I can bring you man should not sleep with other man. Easy. It's mentioned in the books, it's mentioned in the scholars. This is ijma', no problem. This is the easiest argument you can make in your life. But remember, these people are not Muslim. For the most part, a lot of them are not Muslim. LGBT, they're not Muslim. So how do you argue with them? We already said, ask them to prove themselves when it comes to the harm. But there's another technique, which is you guys in Western ethics, you accept something as right and wrong in two fundamental ways. Either categorically or consequentially. Remember these two words, categorically or consequentially. So let's start with consequentially, it's easier. By the way, underneath consequentialism is utilitarianism. So utilitarianism is a form of consequentialist morality. Because remember, they're saying that it's the greatest good for the greatest number of people. That is a form of consequentialism. So you've got consequentialism as the umbrella heading, and utilitarianism comes underneath this. It's a form of consequentialism. And it's probably the most prominent form. It is the most prominent form. Yes? So we say, fine. You're saying the greatest good for the greatest number of people. But what you haven't defined are the consequences in question. Do you agree, you could ask them, that the spread of diseases is a consequence we should be analyzing? Now, at the end of the day, it's not connected to welfare. So, okay, let's just think about homosexuality. Lgbtq, does it increase sexually transmitted diseases or does it decrease it? According to the NHS, the National Health Service, in England, they say a person with a homosexual person is 15 times more likely to have AIDS. Almost every sexually transmitted disease, every single one of them, they are 10 to 20 times more likely to have it. Every sexually transmitted disease. And a lot of these sexually transmitted diseases can be transmitted through other than sexual intercourse. Blood transfusion, through touching, even some of them can be like that. Not all of them, not AIDS. AIDS is through blood or through sex. But I'm not talking about it. I'm talking about other diseases, gonorrhea, chlamydia, these ones. Genetical warts. If you, statistically, if you meet a homosexual, he is 15 to 20 times more likely to carry diseases sexually transmitted than a normal person. Why would you want to put yourself in a position like that? And the existence of this group means that this can affect the dominant population. Let's say it's like apartheid, and we're going to lock up the gates. Sorry to say, but there's nothing in the race of a person that can transmit to somebody else like that, inherently in the race. But there is in the sexual practice of the people. You increase the practice, you increase the disease. You see the point here? So that's one consequence. Let's see the other consequences. All the studies that we have, and I'm not even going to cite that like yesterday. You can write anything in Google you want. Indicates that homosexual families, like a family with 2 men or 2 women, that their children are A, more likely to engage in crime. B, more likely to have psychological pathologies. C, more likely to attain less in education. D, less likely to have functional families of their own. A, B, C, D. E, more likely to have sexually transmitted diseases. E, see, look at all these consequences, too much. Too much. More likely that the parents will engage in domestic violence. Why? And this is an interesting situation. You know, maybe in your own lives you have brothers, you have sisters. When you have 2 brothers together of an equal size, equal strength, they fight. They fight each other. Why? Because they both reckon they have a chance with somebody else. But when you have someone who's stronger, like a male, and then you have a female, it's unlikely that, because there's a power balance now, that the woman, if she wants to hurt the man, she's not going to punch him. Sometimes she will, because she's lost, she lost it. She'll slap you, she'll spit on you, she'll punch you, But for the most part, it's not going to be the effective method of choice for a woman. Do you see what I mean? So when you have a power imbalance, and now they're the same kind of strength and weight and size, lesbianism, for example, 2 women together, when they're together and then you have children, they have the worst domestic rates of violence. Beating each other up, pulling each other's hair, smacking each other's, and no one's there to stop it. Okay? You know, in South Africa. In South Africa.
There's no referee.
Oh, there's no referee. Yeah, that's right. In the UFC, there'd be a referee to come in and say, okay, that's it, it's done. Here, there's 2 women that are fighting each other, this and that, and it started all this, who's going to stop it? And the blood and this. So it creates domestic violence situations. And statistically, there is more. Yes.
What about the consequentialist ethics of knowing what the slippery slope argument that we want to stop it from the roots, from them growing? Because 30 years ago, they were protesting, they had their march flights, whatever, but now they're starting to indoctrinate the educational system, the entertainment system. So can we not use that as some form of ethics?
No, but we're trying to, yes, you're right. I'm saying that in the first instance, we're trying to show why it's wrong itself. I'm saying, how do we prove homosexuality is wrong? Say, okay, Quran, Sunnah, Hadith, Bible, easy, yeah? I'm saying, okay, religion can easily disprove homosexuality is wrong. But now what else can we do? I'm saying, from an ethical perspective, they either believe in what or what? They either believe that morality is what science sees. Categorical or consequential. Categorical is like linked to which philosopher? Immanuel Kant. That if everyone done it, it's called the categorical. If everyone done it, this would be dysfunctional or whatever it is. Yeah. So we're going to come to that. We're going to touch that. But we're here, the consequentialist form. And we said all of the consequences that you want to look at on a material level, political consequences, social consequences, individual consequences, familial consequences, economic consequences. Actually, I want to ask, what positive consequences do we get from homosexuals being in society? That's actually the important question. Or that you get a group of people that can spread diseases and that can create children that have malignancies. Sorry to say, that's not good consequences, even from your. So, based on the consequentialist morality, you can easily argue against homosexuality. Our argument is stronger than their argument. Okay, they're saying maybe we can go to the categorical imperative. But we've already stated that, I hate it, that if everyone in society was gay, there would be no proliferation of the human species. That's what categorical imperative said. According to Kant, homosexuality should be wrong. Because if everyone's done it, human race would stop. Didn't he say that if everyone lied, it wouldn't work? If everyone broke their promises, it wouldn't work? If everyone committed suicide, it would work? I said, okay, everyone became gay. 2 generations, 3 generations, the human race is dead. We have only elderly people, and finish. So from a categorical perspective, they're wrong. From a consequential perspective, they're wrong. From an Islamic perspective, they're wrong. From a Christian perspective, they're wrong. From a Jewish perspective, they're wrong. I just want to know where they're right. And they try and justify the Baha'u principle, they can't prove it. The hedonistic principle, they can't prove it. All of their punches are missing. And all of our punches will be landing. And you see, if you do this, you will win the argument. You will win the argument against the homosexual. There's no way that you will present arguments like this and lose. How could you? On what grounds? Now it's 12 o'clock. We've covered, I think, quite a lot here. Yes? We've obviously, I think we've got another session after, right? Oh, we don't have any sessions after. We've got half an hour now. So instead of going through third wave feminism, because I think that would be, you've covered actually the majority of what I was going to mention, like, you know, postmodernism and stuff like that. But I've written a small book about it. It's called Fifth Wave Feminism. It's like very complicated, but it's meant for that kind of audience. Instead of that, I want to open it up for questions and answers, including sisters, because I think it's going to be more productive. Because now you can ask any question you like on these dawah topics. Hopefully, you're now armed with what you need to deal with the LGBT, to deal with the feminists, to deal with the liberals. These are the 3 main groups that the Muslim Ummah has been attacked by. Hopefully, by today, you have enough that you're armed, you can deal with them. You revise those arguments. We've been using these arguments for over a decade. With their top guys, honestly. With their top intellectuals and philosophers and academics, and also with the laity. And they've never let us down. They're battle-tested arguments. They're battle-tested and peer-reviewed at the highest level. So I'm saying to you, you're in good hands. Use the arguments, you will and be confident. Don't let them overconfident. Don't let them be confident, overconfident on you, because you have the truth and they have the falsehood. You have the arguments, you have the evidence, and they don't have the evidence. Don't be afraid to ask them the questions. You're in a good position. I feel confident about you. Hopefully, you feel confident about yourself. Now, let's open it up for questions and answers, inshallah.
Okay, so first we'll take 2 questions to these. Okay, so one of the questions is, how do we understand utilitarian concepts alongside similar ideological stances such as masalih, maqasid? What are the similarities and what are the differences?
That's a very, very good question. So, the question was, just to repeat it, how do we understand some consequentialist ideas vis-a-vis our own principles as Muslims in usul al-fiqh, like maqasid al-sharia and so on? And there is a flesh that joins some of them. For example, we have a principle that says ad-darar yuzal, that harm is to be averted. Ad-darurat tubih al-mahdhurat, that necessities make halal haram effectively, or haram halal. And they come from the Quran. And so on. Whoever has been forced to eat the pig and eats it, it's not something which is accountable for. So what's the difference between the two? There is a big part of Islam which involves consequentialism. But it also only involves consequentialism under the Sharia. Meaning, you cannot use a consequentialist argument to remove a hukm from the Quran or Sunnah. For example, let me give you an easy example. There's a qaida which says, ad-darar yuzal, harm is to be averted. But Allah says, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِتَالُ وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ. You have to go and fight. But fighting is harmful for you. So in this situation, you cannot use the harm arguments against the hukm shar'i. You see, masalih and mafasid are only used in masalih mursala all masalah mula'im. There's maslah mulgha, which means something which it goes against the Quran and Sunnah. You cannot use this. Do you see? So in other words, we believe something is haram if it causes harm. So long as there's no nas, there's no Quranic verse that tells us otherwise. So number one, you have Quranic verse, Quran, Sunnah. And then you have these arguments made by the scholars of Islam. And they have different reasonings of it. Do you see? So in other words, there is a consequential scope, but it's not that big. For example, why is smoking haram according to the majority of scholars? Because it is harmful. There's no verse of Allah that says smoking is haram. They say the illah of it is darar, is thing. Of course, someone can say that why is McDonald's haram? It is. McDonald's, if you eat so much of it that makes you fat and ugly and this and that and disgusting inside the body, it's haram. It's the same illah, exactly the same, which is a darar. It's the same thing. You cannot sugar. If you have so much sugar kill yourself. Yeah, they say. So you can see sometimes you can do tafsir of hukm shar'i. But there's a difference between hukm and Allah, and I won't go into detail. But the idea is this: you can never use a consequentialist argument to abrogate or remove a hukm shar'i. You can only use it where A, it's in line with the hukm shar'i, which is called maslaha mula'ima. Mula'ima. I think that we use both. Yeah. And maslaha mursala, which is there's no nas there, there's no text on the matter. But there's another kind of maslaha which is called mulgha, which is it goes against. You cannot use marrying this or doing that is harmful, therefore we're going to abrogate. So the consequentialist aspect, we don't disregard it completely, but we don't embrace it completely. There are some things which will always be wrong. Let me give you, but shirk and kufr, by the way, is not one of those. Because we know kufr, you can say words of kufr if you're under duress. Someone puts a gun in you say, garnish is God. You can say garnish is God. But al-Ghazali mentions in Mustasfa, which is the book of Usul Fiqh. He says there's some things you can never do. For example, if someone puts a gun to your head and says, rape your child, sorry to say that. You can never say, okay, I will do it. Because that's the kind of thing that is categorical. So you see, Islam, it knows exactly when to be consequentialist, and it knows exactly when to be categorical. And that is part of the miracle of the ahkam of Islam. It doesn't subscribe to one of the two. It does have something which is completely as we never do this. And if someone says, go and shoot these 3 people, otherwise I shoot you, you have to take the shot. If he even says shoot one person, obviously some discuss Muslim religion. Well, I'm not going to go into this. The point is that there's a level of consequential in Islam, but you need to understand the scope of it. You need to read the books of Usul Fiqh. And these situations and scenarios are put. Sometimes it's consequential. Like at Tatarus, I'm not sure if you've heard of this. At Tatarus, like using a shield, which is a human shield in a war. Ghazali mentions this issue very specifically in Mustafa, and he goes into detail about it. I'm not going to comment too much, but the idea is sometimes consequential, sometimes not. He mentions also a boat, 3 people in the boat. Can you still, the boat is going to capsize. Can you throw one person to save 2? Ghazali says, no, you cannot. For example. So each situation has its merits and demerits, has its scholars talking about it. Consequentialism does feature in Islam. They all know it. The scholars of Islam do this. They spoke about it before even this guy that he's making circular arguments. Before this guy that was making circular arguments, Ghazali spoke about it in depth about these issues. He told us where it counts, this is where it doesn't count, all these things. The Muslim world was well ahead of the West, so well ahead of it. For example, Ghazali died 1111. That's like how many years? I don't know how many years ago. Like 1,000 years ago, like 900 years ago. This guy died like 200-300 years ago, and we're talking about the same issues that he's refusing. 800 years before he done things, he spoke about this. So it shows you that Islam has all the answers. And yes, there are principles of Islam and consequential and stuff. However, it cannot supersede the nas. It cannot supersede the clear text of this. And every school of thought nothing can, no maslaha can supersede it. المصلحة لا تقدم على الناس. Only one person who ever said that in Islamic history that I know. His name is Najmuddin al-Tufi. And he wrote a commentary on 40 Nawawi, and he mentioned that in the hadith, and then everyone was. But yeah, that's the answer to your question. Yes.
Another question. In academic discourse, like modern academic discourse, ethics is the role of divine technology or not?
No, it's not. Effectively, I mean, it's not. They're trying to argue morality without God. That's what they. Kant said, he effectively said, I want to argue morality without God. That's what they're trying to do. Most consequentialists and atheists, they're not putting God in the equation. Of course, John Locke and others, they would put God in the equation to some extent. Like John Locke, who's the first liberal, he was making some theological arguments. He was responding to someone called Robert Filmer. He says that we're born equal and we're born endowed by God and we use religious language. So to some extent, some of them will invoke God when it's convenient for them to make their case, like John Locke. But for the most part, especially if you look at 1780s, 1900s, they're not mentioning God at all. In fact, they want to create a morality without God. That's the whole project, that's the idea. Without religion, let's try to create one right and wrong. So that's what they're trying to do.
Just to add to that, what's important as well is to understand the European history. What Europeans do generally, they have this kind of European spirit complex, so they have a Eurocentric understanding of the world. So if you look back at the Reformation before and after, and yes, it's a combination of the religious issues and trade rights and so on and so forth. But what happened was Europe was like chin high in blood. You had the 80-year wars, you had the 30-year wars, you had the religious wars, you had the massive concept of what you say. And according to Professor John Chavez in his introduction to the book, a little project of human rights, or human rights project for the Sri Lanka it is. But he basically argues that this facilitated the understanding these thinkers have to basically remove the individual from God's will for society. And that's one of the motivations, historical motivations for why these thinkers didn't even want to refer to God. And that's why it's our role to explain to people, look, you have a utilitarian framework or consequentialist or ideological reference point. We don't accept these as foundational to our ethics. What we accept is the divine command. And even when you look at the maslaha and mafsada issue, it's not consequentialist from the point of view that we start off foundation with the idea that it's about maximum pleasure for maximum number of people. Or rather, it's because of Allah's pleasure, it's His commands, or the reference point of the Quran and the Sunnah that facilitate this type of thing. Yeah? So that's what we have to, when we mentioned the presentation, in one of the assumptions of the LGBTQ+, which includes transgender, gender fluidity, and homosexuality, and all of that stuff, is that when you refer back to utilitarianism, you refer back to deontological ethics, you could do a strategy which is use those frames of reference against them, because you could show from a utilitarian perspective homosexuality is wrong, transgender is wrong. Like if you look at what's happening with the transgender movement, they're mutilating each other. Literally, they're mutilating, and they were complaining about circumcision. They were complaining about circumcision and like FGM or whatever you call it. And you should see the level of mutilation that happens with the church. They call it gender affirming care as well. The way they frame it as well, it's like something nice and soft. Gender affirming care. I'm not saying you should look at the pictures, but it's horrific. It's horrific. They would take the forearm, the muscles of the forearm, and reconstruct a fake phallus. Yeah? And it's not even working anyway. At times they can't even do it with that, so they take parts of the rectum. And then they end up with something that is smelly for life, and it grows hair. I'm sorry for being very crude. But people need to realize this. It's disgraceful, disgusting. And it's not happening to others, it's happening to children now as well. Puberty blockers, this, that, and the other. It's absolutely horrific. So you can have that view. But I like to also frame it from a dawah perspective. Just go straight and say, look, it's what Allah says that counts. And explain to them why. Explain to who Allah is, and then explain to them the foundation, wherever it comes from truth is true. We believe in divine commands. Why? Because Allah is all-knowing, all-wise, He's the source of all goodness. He's Al-Hakim, Al-Alim, He's Allah, He's Al-Rahman. And His commands are derivative of His nature, His name is natural.
And we believe that's true because Allah exists, revelation is true, and we can prove that. And they should, this should be your reference point for morality, not these things, because they're false, by virtue of what we just said. And then you respond if they usually bring out the retrieval dilemma, which is quite common. And you surely have to respond to it. Yes. So that's that from the ethical perspective. Now, in academia, they also do discuss divine command. Adams and others, there's a massive discussion, but hijab is right. It's not part of any ethical discourse. So if they say, should we do this in medical ethics, or should we do that, they totally ignore it. However, it's been a little bit nuanced. In medical ethics, they actually include spirituality. They've included it now. And that's because, but they don't do it because they believe it should be true. They do it because, when someone's dying or someone's really ill, they realize that for that individual's well-being, you have to cite the religious background and use that as, a form of ethics. But they won't allow that to go against the very theological perspective. But
When examining consequentialism and the harm principle, how do we respond to the claims that non-acceptance and non-support of the LGBT community are actually contributing to the harm and not helping the society?
Just repeat the last sentence again.
How do we respond to the claim that non-acceptance and non-support of the LGBT community are actually contributing to the harm of society?
I think we should both answer this, but remember when we said about love is love, about that rhetorical trap, that misframing, that cognitive trap, yeah? And the rhetorical trap. So the assumption here is that if you don't allow people to express their desires or their made-up identity based on gender fluidity, then what happens is it's going to harm themselves. Look what's happening in South African schools. Let me show you right now. Look at the way they frame it in the schools, and you're thinking it's not coming here. It's already here. Ahlan wa sahlan. Unfortunately, this is in a South African school. Activity 2.1: changes associated with development. You are expected to do extensive study and research. Now listen to this. Activity 2.2: homophobia. Read the extract below and answer the questions that follow. Homophobia should be addressed. Question mark. Hiding your identity will eventually take its toll. Now look at the misframing here. They're assuming that your desire is part of your identity. We unpack that in the presentation. Whether it's being done consciously or unconsciously, for me, the last few years of my teens were an incredible, difficult, and anxious time. As my female friends started talking about boys, dating, and embarking upon long-term relationships, I found I had no interest in opposite sex at all, and started to feel like there was something horribly wrong with me. I tried to pretend to be like the other girls, but that didn't really feel good. Again, associating identity with feeling, okay? Identity with desires. I became far more interested in writing and making theatre than I was in boys, so I threw myself into that instead. My family rejected me, and some community members called me names. Some people adversely addressed me, oh, what a cruel world. And then there's a question: what is homophobia? What does LGBTQI stand for? Give 4 reasons why homophobia should be addressed, and so on and so forth. So, what we would say here is actually harmful from an Islamic, because you just throw it back at them. Well, what do you define as harm? They would relate harm to actually decreasing pleasure or some kind of ill-being. Even then, they don't know what they're talking about. We would say we have clearly defined guidelines in the Sharia of what harm is. And we know that's true because it comes from a true basis. So we would reject their conception of harm. Because if you feel that your desires forms your identity, we say that's already harmful. Because remember, we have a metaphysical outlook. It's spiritually harmful, it's intellectually harmful, it's socially harmful. Because in general, all the commands of Allah are good for us. They increase our well-being, and all the prohibitions are bad for us, and they decrease our well-being. So we would unpack what they actually referring to as harm. We say, well, no, it's actually harmful to actually develop your identity as part of that's framed as your desires. And we would say what your true identity is actually you're a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then that would lead to doubt and discuss exactly why we believe that to be the case. The other thing that we should mention in this issue concerning the whole harm issue is you could go down the consequentialist route, what hijab just spoke about.
Well, all right, if you think your desires from your identity and you want to be a homosexual or lesbian or whatever the case may be, well, look at the consequences concerned. That's actually harmful. It's harmful for the whole of society. It increases ill-being for the great number of people rather than increasing pleasure for the great number of people. So you challenge the assumption that they think this is harmful. And we would even say to them that, it is, especially because this is not just about homosexuality. Remember, the aggressive movement now is continuing to be the transgender movement increasing and so on and so forth. And we would challenge some of those ideas as well. That negating any biological traits with regards to gender and transitioning and these issues. Negating any biological traits and just assuming it's language and it's a social hierarchy, it's a socialization, is actually harmful. Is actually harmful. And you explain why, because yes, we would reject biological essentialism, but we won't go to the other extreme and say there are no biological markers at all. And once you negate biological markers, you get people, you see the consequences, you get people who transition physically, they remove their breast tissue, so sorry to say, they remove some of the muscles in the forearm or some parts of the rectum to create a phallus, or if they already have a phallic appendage, what they'll do, they'll cut it out, reconstruct it, and make it look like with all due respect, the female part, and then every week they have to put a clamp in there to keep it open. Yeah, and if it doesn't, it closes and it gets infected. It's like an open wound. Sorry to say. And then many people now, there's a growing, I'm telling you, the next 5 years, it's going to be court cases. Yeah? It's going to go crazy. People want to transition back, it's too late. And there's a lot of people coming out saying, I regret this. So, in a small nutshell, you just focus on why they think that this is harm in the first place. And then if you redefine it in different ways, you go down the consequences, which actually it's not the case. You go down the moral, talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commands. You go down the identity route that you think the desire is not following the desire is actually harmful, and show that actually real identity is worshipping Allah, and bring it back to why Islam says that's the case, and bring them back to the fitrah and show them that the foundations of Islam are true. So these are three main ways of actually reframing the whole harm thing. Like if you don't follow my desires, i.e. my identity, they make desire and identity the same. That therefore it's harmful. You can unpack it in those three ways.
In the beginning, where you said that if we were to argue with their validity argument and say that, okay, if you can transition to being gay, then you can also transition back. So, what if someone was to object and say, for example, that was just between bisexual then, or if they use that, I've seen this example used before, with like shaving, you take it out of the bottle, but you can't put it back in. So, in something like that, how would you respond?
Bisexuality is defined as having an attraction to both genders at the same time. So it's not actually, they can say, well, it's bisexual. No, it wouldn't. We would make it homosexual at one time, heterosexual at one time, heterosexual at one time, homosexual at another. So bisexuality is when you like both at the same time. Yeah. So it's not bad. I mean, this is, if they say that, that's how you respond. I'm not sure.
But this is the humorous note. Remember we said they're going to redefine language, they think any kind of categories, and so they're going to start. Maybe they'll find another term for this. They'll call it schizosexual. I'm telling you, we might come up with it, right? Sometimes I'm gay, sometimes I'm not gay. Yeah, so it's like a schizosexual. Anyway, we're not helping.
And approach to today's question, where how do we prevent some ideologies in our community? The other side is those women who are oppressed at home, by themselves, etc. We see them, not all, but some subscribing to the feminist ideology. So how do we help them? Because they're going to be in this situation, and they may not be able to get out of this oppression. So is there like a substitute?
We have to really define oppression, because like many people nowadays, men and women, they claim that they're being oppressed, but it's not in line with the Islamic ideal of what oppression is. What Islam says oppression is, or bullying, is what are shaped in the against something. It's putting something in its unrightful place. In effect, it's inappropriacy, which is exactly the opposite of the Arabic word hikmah. Hikmah is what are shaped in the Dhulm is the exact opposite of hikmah, it's wisdom. From the Islamic perspective, dhulm or oppression is when the rights of somebody is not being given. Now, depending on what kind of rights, or that rights are being taken away, either it's not being given or it's being taken away. Depending on what kinds of rights, there is solutions in the Sharia already. So, for example, if a woman is not being given her rightful money, then she can obviously do nafaqa on a monthly basis. She's not being paid her money, like the man is not paying for the housing or whatever. This is a new piece of that. So, a point where she's very distressed and putting harm, pain in her body and stuff like this. Of course, she can do rough qada, go to the people, the ulama of the community, and they should happen between them to see inside of the story and outside of the story, and so on and so forth. And this is how it should be. Of course, what some people do is that they'll take some small things which are not Islamic in the first place, yes, and they'll say these are rights I'm not being given. But who said that these are rights in the first place? For example, oh, you haven't taken me to this country or that country, or you haven't taken me to dinner. I'm saying the men should take the rights now, as I said today. Be very romantic, very spontaneous, and all these kind of things. Because we don't want them to be upset with us. But really, it's not a Islamic right that oh, you have to take you to this place and that place and enjoy it, buy this and that. This is not dhulm, you know what I'm saying? So, really depends on the situation. But just because someone claims, because we have this in America, for example, we have a very bad situation where women are manipulating men, and not just any women. Alhamdulillah, I consider everyone here to be like orthodox and traditional. I'm talking about women who have feministic traits. They will manipulate certain men, and they're weak-minded, and they will fold under pressure. All she has to do is make an accusation. What do you call it? Sulaiman in the Quran, Allah says we taught him how to give judgment. How? Because he listened to two sides of the story. Because he listened to this one, he spoke to that one. He wasn't quick to give divorces and khula and fasq. Some people in England, you don't want to go into a situation. They give £30, £50, I'll give you a khula. The guy has studied anything. And it doesn't like, yeah, I give khula. And she doesn't even call the man in to see the side of the story. And then she regrets it afterwards. Unbelievable situation. You don't want that to happen here. You've got, alhamdulillah, of the many countries I've visited over 30 countries and visited over 40. And I've seen the majority of countries in the West and Muslim communities in those countries. South Africa, the Muslim community here in Johannesburg is one of the best. You've got one of the most tightly knit communities here. You've got institutions, you have schools, they operate at a very high level. Your socioeconomically doing okay in this area at least. In this area, it's on Cape Town with analysis. So you should be preserving what you have, preserving the scholars, preserving the institutions. This is a ni'mah, trust me, you do not have it in other parts of the West, you do not have it in other parts, even in the Muslim majority world. You'll find the Muslim majority world, those North Africa, you'll find Morocco, Algeria, Egypt, all kinds of problems happening. So you have the ni'mah. And so the people here, if they start thinking about, let me go to the dominant population, and I have oppression and this kind of thing, go to the dominant population, you'll see you'll get rinsed out, you get finished. You will not be treated with respect. I believe if a woman here tries to go to the dominant population, might be completely wrong, and tries to effectively remove herself from the community and go to that community, let's say whites, to try and get her rights and stuff, they will never see her as an equal. Anyway, because of the apartheid backdrop of the country, they'll treat her less. She'll never get the same privileges as she will. And so it's not in anyone's best interest for them to leave the Islamic framework, the institutional framework, which the people, the predecessors of this place, have worked so hard to establish. And it's very difficult to establish, and go somewhere to the dominant population where the people will be treating them badly anyway, and will never get the same rights, responsibilities, respect, or any of those things. So just let them know that. And for everyone to keep discipline with this kind of thing, try and sort everything out within families and within communities. Try and sort it out within your own house first. And then the Quran says if that's not possible, فَبَعَثُوا حَكَمًا مِنْ شِقَاقِ بَيْنِهِمَا. فَبَعَثُوا حَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهِ وَحَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهِ. If you fear, if the community fears that these people are going to split up, bring someone from her family, from his family, you know, maybe have a meeting. I don't know how you guys do it. You have your own cultural ways of doing it. Whatever way is doing it is working. Because let me tell you something. The divorce rate, from my understanding, of your community is actually quite low compared to the dominant culture. It is low compared to the dominant culture. You might be surprised. In America, it's like 70%. Most people, like 60-something percent, that get married, the hustle is that they're going to get divorced. This is the truth. So you don't want to go to this. You've already got a better system than these dysfunctional systems. We want to break something that's working. Yes, of course, there's the room for improvement, and the institutions can be better, of course, and everyone's trying their best. But what you have, trust me, I've been around, I've been to many different countries. It's a great blessing. You should make sure and alhamdulillah subhanahu wa ta'ala of what you have in South Africa.
My question is with regards to, for example, power structures and exercise of power. So why do we see postmodernists or advocates for critical race theory? They always seem to assume that power structures are inherently evil and that the exercise of power is inherently evil. Whereas we as believers, we do seek power, and we believe that by having power and influence, we will be able to institute a haq that's to the benefit of all people. But why do these groups look at power structures and exercise of power as inherent evil?
Yes, it's a very good question. Now, I don't know much about critical race theory, it's not my field, but with regards to the general postmodern principles and how they apply, what they would say is that we have access to power. It's like a grid, okay? It's not there, it's pressing on top of us. And there are structures in place, hierarchies in place, the social structures, the socialization in place that will take power and use it to their advantage and their interests. And they will perpetuate it through language, okay? So that means they say these power structures will tell you what can be known and what cannot be known, okay? And this is of course this through discourses. And at the same time, the language itself is inherently masculine or inherently biased towards the masculine or inherently hierarchical by virtue of its binary nature. So they would say, since that's the case, it's oppressive intrinsically. Because you have power is permeating across everywhere, everyone's got access to power as a grid, but there are socializations and power structures that can almost consume. If you grab like a pot, yeah, you consume it, and now look, I've got control of that power. I'm going to tell you through language what can be known, what cannot be known, and I'm going to use my structure and use that language to actually support my interests, whether they're ideological or whatever it is to be. So what they say is, you need to now disturb language and disturb the power structure. But they also admit, and that's these people are crazy people, they also admit that you always have a social construct, and you always be constrained in language, especially from a derivation perspective, because language doesn't represent any reality. So what they say is, just keep on disturbing the hierarchy, keep on disturbing language. Or what they would say is, create a socialization as flat as possible, and create a language that is closer to what they would say, the ability to have an optimal freedom. Yeah? But in doing that, they enslave themselves in it, and you see that practice. So I don't have to address that within a critical race theory framework, but that is the postmodern principle framework, and it is connected, right? Because they would say that being white in and of itself is a hierarchy by virtue of history, by virtue of the color, what is associated with it, and by virtue of the connected consciousness of the white man, what they've done for centuries. And they say, therefore, you are a symbol of that power structure, and language that has been used in your community or otherwise is being perpetuated, and therefore it's a form of oppression. Critical race theory is the only way how to study it. So I don't.
Others, I'm sure, sisters as well, I'm sure you have many more questions. You can probably engage the speakers through email and through other means. And this is the first opportunity really to get the discussion going. You would also agree with me, my dear brothers and sisters, that this has been a very, very informative a learning experience for many of us. We have benefited immensely from the knowledge that was shared here today and over this last 2 days by both Brother Muhammad Hijab and Brother Hamza, and we are grateful to them. Jazakallah ahsan al-jaza. We all join in thanking you for taking out your time, being here with us, and really making us, I think, more better equipped, certainly, and putting us on this journey, like you said earlier on, towards becoming diaries, becoming more au fait with these important ideas. So we would like to thank you, alhamdulillah, on behalf of all the participants. Also, we would like to thank all the organizers here, this institution, Pretoria North Muslim Education Institute, for hosting us here, Markaz al-Fikr, for putting this program together, and the participants here. You have been a wonderful audience. You have cooperated fully. You have come with through, sometimes through difficult weather. You have been on time, and you have participated fully. We appreciate your participation here. Jazakumullah ahsan al-jaza. Also then, 2 housekeeping things before we break. Lunch has been prepared for everyone. Please remain behind after Salah for lunch.